2022 had a lot of horror movies, and I just watched most of the major ones in the past month, so I'm all caught up now. Here are my thoughts. Check it out. Here are all the movies I'll be talking about in this video. There will be chapters and timestamps, so you can skip around if you want, but I also want you to know that if you just want to watch the whole thing, there won't be any spoilers. So if you haven't seen any of these movies, you won't have anything ruined. After what I would characterize as a weak year for horror in 2021, I think 2022 really brought it. I've never gotten too deep into the indie horror movies, which is ironic considering how deep I've gotten into indie horror games, I know. But while 2022 was a year in which I wasn't generally in a good state of mind to watch horror movies, like I said, I'm all caught up now, and let me tell you, I had a great time watching most of these movies. All right, let's go. Malignant technically came out in September 2021, but I want to talk about it anyway. What are you going to do about it? Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyway, Malignant is the latest film from director James Wan, who you may know from the Conjuring movies, Insidious, and the original Saw, among others. If you're a fan of horror movies, you've seen at least one of his. And dare I say, this is probably my favorite James Wan film, which I wasn't expecting. For the first half of Malignant, I was interested, but unexcited. And for the second half of the movie, I was like, oh, this is an absolutely bonkers movie. Let's go. James Wan and screenwriter Akilah Cooper do a lot of creative things with this movie. Malignant has a really strong second act, and it's unfortunately bogged down a little by a fairly uneventful first act that's really similar to pretty much any other major release horror movie. That's my nice way of saying it was boring. But then I just said it was boring, so it's kind of boring. But it made up for it. One of the things I'll say about Malignant is that, like many horror movies that I enjoy, I think you'll get the most out of it if you just kind of let it happen. I'll talk more about this later, but a lot of people prevent themselves from enjoying not only horror movies, but entertainment in general these days by enforcing their own expectations and their own directorial wishes onto what they're watching. And if you go into this movie with that kind of attitude, you probably won't like it, because it gets ridiculous. Even comedic in spots. But I like that about it. I much prefer watching a horror movie with a big stupid grin on my face rather than feeling tense for a few moments maybe. But it's best if I can get both of those in one film, and Malignant accomplished that for me. All right, Barbarian. This was an interesting one. The solo directorial debut of Zach Kreger, who is, you guessed it, one of the guys from the late 2000s comedy sketch group, The Whitest Kids You Know.
Come again, sir?
Wait, did you really guess that? You must have cheated. That's so specific. Like Malignant, and honestly, like most good horror movies, Barbarian's best enjoyed when you go in not knowing anything. However, I also understand that you're unlikely to check out a movie without some kind of hook, so I'll give you a brief teaser. Barbarian's a movie about a young woman, played very well by Georgina Campbell, who runs into an almost rom-com kind of meet-cute situation where the Airbnb she's reserved turns out to already be occupied by Bill Skarsgård, and shenanigans ensue. Things get pretty wild in this movie, not quite as wild as in Malignant, whose second act I prefer to Barbarian's second act, but even so, it was fun to watch everything slowly unfold and for the rabbit hole to go deeper and deeper. I've seen some criticisms online about this movie pertaining to, we'll just say, certain decisions that the main character makes, like she knowingly dives headfirst into danger. But my thing is, that part of her character is intentional. It's arguably what the big moment of the film revolves around at the climax. It's not just the trope of a horror character acting irrationally like we often see parodied in pop culture, right?
If you're in a horror movie, you make poor decisions. That's what you do. Switch to Geico.
Can I say, just in general, I see way too many shallow criticisms of movie characters supposedly acting irrationally or making illogical decisions, and I find that in a lot of cases when people level these criticisms, the reason they find the character's actions to be irrational is not because the character's poorly written, but because they don't properly understand the character, or maybe even the story at large. It's a media literacy issue. A lot of the time. Not every time, but in this case, I think it's true. Now, were there a couple times in this movie when I was like, oh, come on, don't do that? Yes, there were, absolutely. But that's me and my decision making. And these characters in these movies are different people with different priorities. It's natural to be frustrated by it because it may not be what we would do, but sometimes
that's the whole point. Sometimes that's the whole point of the entire movie.
So yeah, Barbarian. It gets wild. Wish it got a little wilder, but overall enjoyed it. Next, Nope is the latest film from director Jordan Peele, who's not only half of one of my favorite comedy duos,
I said, babe.
Hey guys.
Hey girl, how you doing?
but also, funnily enough, a very talented horror director. All right, you know what I'm about to say. I'm gonna get it the obligatory, if you haven't seen Get Out, you need to see it section out of the way, okay? We're good, you know? You know. So Nope is one of the most critically acclaimed movies of the year, and I think for a lot of people, it was 2022 horror movie of the year, but I'm actually not that big on this one.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry.
It's kind of the opposite of some of the other movies I've already talked about, like Malignant and Barbarian. The first act of this movie is really interesting to me, and then I found myself less interested as it went on. It's not that the second act is bad or anything. I think this is, unfortunately, it's one of those cases where, like I said before, I let my expectations for where the movie would go get in the way of the director's vision. And for what it's worth, Nope is a very interesting movie overall. It's a twist on the genre, it's a unique movie, and I'm glad I watched it. But I just don't know if I want to watch it again. And I find that repeat viewings are what tend to separate the horror movies that really resonate with me from the ones that were just okay. Also, I do want to note, Keke Palmer does a knockout job in this movie, by the way. Maybe I've been asleep under a rock or something, but I did not see that performance coming. She did great.
Dude, you were literally my favorite.
So Nope is my least favorite Jordan Peele horror movie, but it's not bad by any means. I think it just didn't hit, and part of that is the genre that it's in. Admittedly, I don't like many films at all in the same genre as Nope, and despite what it does differently, it just wasn't quite enough for me.
How you doing? You look pretty. It's like she got a big house.
Black Phone is a movie about a little boy who gets kidnapped by this guy named Onision. Onision isn't a good person, and hopefully he'll be in prison soon. But before that, our hero has to escape and alert the authorities. And to do that, he has to harness the power of the mysterious black phone. This movie kind of reminded me of Split a little bit, but it's less focused on spectacle and more on providing a cool character arc. Mason Thames and Madeline McGraw are both very good in the two lead roles and definitely elevated the material. It's very easy for child actors to ruin the vibe of a horror movie for me, but they did great.
I took him down because obviously I'm the grabber, you dumb fucking fart knockers.
Gwendolyn Blake.
Ethan Hawke as the villain was good, but a little underutilized. I would have liked to have seen a little more of him. And that's exactly what the film excels at and what many people may find disappointing. Initially, after I first finished watching, I found his character underdeveloped. I felt like there should have been more. But after giving it some time to digest, I changed my mind. Black Phone works well because he's an underdeveloped character. It makes him scarier. It was a deliberate move. It's funny because I did exactly what I was so against doing earlier when I was talking about Barbarian. Remember when I was saying the character isn't written poorly? Well, Exhibit A, egg on my face. Looks like I was the one imposing my own directorial wishes on this one. Whamp whamp. So yeah, Black Phone, solid movie. I didn't think it would be the type to stick with me afterwards, but it did. The Menu is one of the most annoying horror films I've ever seen, which is a shame because it's full of great acting performances. Anya Taylor-Joy as a blunt, sarcastic main character, Ralph Fiennes as a pompous celebrity chef, and Nicholas Hoult as one of the most pathetic, irritating characters that's ever graced the screen.
You know, a Paco Jet can produce a powderized, snow-like texture.
Cool.
And it's all helmed by Mike Mylod, who directed 13 out of 30 episodes of one of the best shows on TV, Succession.
You sent the same email to him 67 times in one evening.
You can't make a tomlet without breaking some Greggs.
I guess it was a joke.
So, what went wrong? Well, nothing really. This film's got great reviews. I guess I'm just an idiot. I think the main reason I'm not wild about this movie is because the subject matter doesn't interest me at all. I view food as more of a means to an end than an art form, so watching these food critics and rich people and smug chefs talk about food like it's a religious experience not only disinterested me, but it kind of annoyed me.
This emulsion does look slightly split.
I get that it's a scathing social commentary, but it's not exactly subtle about it. I guess, on that note, the ham-fistedness with which it tackles these topics lends itself well to the dark comedy leanings that it has, but unfortunately, I'm also just not really a fan of dark comedy either. There's also a climactic scene in the movie, which I can only describe as its rosebud moment, and I didn't care for it. I found it to be a bit of a cop-out. Maybe that's too harsh. I understand that they laid the groundwork for that moment and they earned it, or so it seemed, but I just didn't like it. I don't want to make it sound like this was a bad movie. It's not at all. It's just not for me.
No, you don't get it. It's a concept.
I know what a concept is, Tyler.
Trust me, he's telling a story.
X is an interesting one. It follows the story of a ragtag group of adult film producers who want to shoot a pornographic film in a rural farmhouse for some reason. I think all I have to do now is tell you that the film is a slasher, and you'll be able to fill in the rest of the gaps from there. It directly homages Texas Chainsaw Massacre a couple times, which was cool to see since TCM is arguably the greatest slasher movie of all time, but honestly, I didn't find X very interesting as a slasher. I did find it interesting as a character-driven drama, though, which I wasn't expecting. X stars Mia Goth as the main character, who you're probably not familiar with unless you've seen 2013 erotic art film Nymphomaniac or the 2018 Suspiria remake. But she does a great job in this one, as usual. She's one of those actors that never phones it in. The film's well acted overall, speaking of. Hey, look, there's Jenna Ortega from the Wednesday Addams thing. Thought that was awful, by the way, but maybe that's a take for another time. Yeah, you can't boo me on my own video. Alright, anyway, X has some interesting moments, but I found myself wishing it had gotten just a little bit crazier. It felt like it was afraid to really let loose. However, the next film on the list didn't have that problem at all. Pearl is the prequel to X that came out in the same year. How cool is that? And there's a third one on the way, too. Pearl follows the story of a young woman growing up on a farm in 1918 who just wants to be a star on the big screen. And then she I'll just say it, Pearl was worth watching X for. It made the whole thing worth it. The way it's shot to look like classic golden age Technicolor cinema, the way it slowly builds character-driven tension until the big payoff. Like, this is what I was talking about when I said I wanted X to really let loose. Mia Goth did a great job in X as Maxine, but she does a knockout job as Pearl in this one. It's a delightfully unhinged performance and makes watching the movie a lot of fun. On that note, this movie might have the most memorable credits roll of any movie I've ever seen. It ends on such a high note. Very entertaining movie. Now, Mia actually said something about the movie recently that caught a lot of people's attention and proved to be very controversial. She said in a recent interview that horror movies tend to get snubbed by the Oscars and that
a change is necessary.
Oh, by the way, that's her real voice, which blows my mind.
If only they would just die.
But I wanted to take this time to say that I think she's absolutely right. And I actually think she should have been nominated for Best Actress based on her performance in Pearl. It's a performance to me that's comparable to the notorious Oscar snob that was Toni Collette in Hereditary. Hereditary is a polarizing horror film, but even if you didn't enjoy it, you have to admit Toni Collette was dynamite in that movie. It's the type of acting performance that gets an Oscar nod if it's in a drama film. But that's the thing, isn't it? More often than not, horror films are dramas, but they're dramas that have an added layer of a coarse, almost barbaric thrill to them. It almost feels sometimes like you as the horror film viewer are engaging in a lascivious act by watching the movie. Like you're getting a kick out of these characters suffering. And I wonder if it's that uncomfortable feeling of schadenfreude that makes the Academy Awards look down their noses at horror films. One of the characters in X, RJ, goes on multiple rants about how he thinks pornographic films should be taken seriously.
Well, that's because I'm not treating it like pornography, but it's cinema. And that's what these other adult films are lacking.
And I wonder if there's a commentary in there about horror movies too, because that's how I imagine a horror movie director like Ty West, who directed both of these films, would feel at times about his work too. Anyway, I really enjoyed Pearl, and if you haven't seen it, you don't need to watch X first, or even at all. Like I said, it is an X prequel, but it's also a standalone film. So have at it. Probably my favorite horror movie of the year. Orphan First Kill, the prequel movie to the 2009 thriller Orphan. Who the hell had this on their 2022 bingo card? Not me. So if you've seen the first Orphan, you're probably thinking to yourself that there are going to be some obstacles in making this movie. And that's how I was thinking about it too, going into it. I was like, how the hell are they gonna pull this off, right? I didn't think they could do it. But they did. They did. I'm honestly amazed that it works. If you're wondering how they pulled it off, all I can say is that they doubled down hard, and it's a really fun movie. It doesn't start out that way. It kind of has some mandatory backstory. It has to set up for Esther before getting into the primary setting, and that first 15 to 20 minutes is really weak. It makes you feel like, oh no, is this how the whole movie is gonna be?
Why would you think that?
But when it picks up, it really picks up, and it goes some unexpected places. Very cool. By the way, the director of this one is William Brent Bell, who also directed 2016's The Boy. I feel like if you're a fan of the 2009 Orphan, you may also like The Boy, and you'll probably also actually like Orphan First Kill. I didn't think I would like it, but I came away feeling similarly thrilled, I would say, to when I saw the first one. Isabel Fuhrman is back to play the titular 9-year-old Esther, but this time the actress is 25 instead of 12, like she was in the first movie. This is one of the other things I was concerned about coming in. We see 20-somethings play high schoolers all the time in movies, and generally you can suspend disbelief enough that they pull it off, but how about playing a 9-year-old? Well, they had to use some camera tricks and body doubles, but honestly, once we got about a third way through the movie, I stopped noticing it. It didn't end up being too distracting or ruining anything. They ended up doing a pretty good job keeping the immersion up. Also, Isabel does an outstanding job, just like she did in the first one. All that to say, Orphan First Kill, arguably the surprise of the year. Smile. All right, now Smile is exactly what I think of when I think of a mainstream horror movie. This has all the bells and whistles of a movie that your friends who watch maybe one horror movie per year and only on Halloween will want to go see. It's got a lot of jump scares, it's got a lot of creepy visuals that look great in a trailer or on a poster, and the story is really simple. Smile's not a bad movie, it's fine, but I feel like I've seen it before. It's like the latest iteration of The Ring, Final Destination, The Grudge, It Follows. The idea that you're haunted or cursed by a malevolent entity and you need to figure out how to break the curse. And for almost 2 hours, yeah, you heard right, 2 hours, it's very long. The plot of the movie is exactly that. Where Smile really excels is in the visual department. The creepy smiling visual really works most of the time. And there's a creature towards the end that I can't show you whose design is really cool. Sosie Bacon turns in a very good performance in the lead role, and we're also treated to the great Robin Weigert, who I loved as Calamity Jane in Deadwood.
This happens to be a rig and contraption of my own devising against repeated accidental falls that has temporarily malfunctioned.
But some of the acting and visuals aside, everything here is really safe. Like I said, it's the kind of mainstream horror movie that all your non-horror friends are gonna wanna go see. And I'm not trying to be gatekeepy or elitist by saying that. It's just, if you watch a lot of horror movies, then you've already seen most of what Smile has to offer in other movies that did it better.
Oh, come on, you saw that already.
I think horror films are at their best when they either challenge the way you think or when they take big risks and make it really fun. And Smile did neither of those for me. Didn't love it, didn't hate it, just thought it was okay. But it was the highest grossing horror film of 2022, so what do I know?
Let me see it.
No.
Let me see it.
No. Look, you don't want to see this.
Halloween Ends, the 13th film in the Halloween franchise and the 4th in the reboot series, was supposed to give a grand finale, befitting arguably the most iconic slasher in horror movie history, and instead it goes out with a whimper.
I know I talk too much. I just get so excited about all that boogeyman bullshit.
Man, I didn't especially like Halloween Kills, the previous movie, but this one made me look back and think, you know, maybe I was too hard on Halloween Kills. That one actually wasn't so bad in retrospect. Like with all the movies I'm talking about in this video, I won't spoil what happens, but let's just say they made some really bizarre choices. If I told you most of the movie revolves around an all-new character that didn't appear in the previous 12 Halloween films, what would you think? Would you think, wow, that sounds like a love letter to the Halloween franchise and a fitting end? Or would you think, well, that's really weird. Why would they do that? What were they thinking? It's so weird to me that Halloween Kills had more of that finale energy than the actual finale had. In Halloween Kills, you've got the citizens of Haddonfield uniting together to put a stop to Michael's reign of terror. And it has this twisted sister, we're not gonna take it atmosphere where the town finally becomes a character. Seriously, this is a storyline that would have been better suited for Halloween Ends. But instead, we get what feels at times like a spin-off. It's not so much that Halloween Ends is a bad horror movie, but it's a bad Halloween movie. I can't believe I'm saying this after 13 films, but I hope they make another one. This can't be how it ends, right? Scream 5. I almost forgot Scream 5 came out this year. I actually saw this one in theaters. It was my first post-COVID theater experience, and it was a good one. Scream is possibly my favorite horror franchise. I think it has the perfect balance of a serious slasher movie and a cheesy, self-aware parody, and they successfully keep that tone present in Scream 5. It's been 11 years since the 4th Scream movie, so I, and I'm sure many others, were afraid they stuck the fork in the Scream franchise, but not only did they come out with this movie, they're making a Scream 6 this year. All good news, I hope.
What? I want to be prepared.
Hard to talk about Scream 5 without getting into spoiler territory, so I'll just say it takes the next logical steps with the formula that a new Scream movie should take. And there's also a pointed theme of a torch being passed, which is just another area where Scream is proving to be ahead of the curve among the other aging slasher franchises. Comparing the future of Scream with Scream 5 to the future of Halloween, which supposedly there's no future with Halloween because it's ended, but come on. I feel much more confident in Scream's future after seeing the 5th film. And for me, all signs point to Scream being the one that lives. It's kind of like the final girl of the classic slasher franchises, and I'm here for it. I had a great time with it. Bring on Scream 6. Please don't be bad. Please don't be bad.
Please, I'll do anything.
Terrifier 2. All right. The notoriously gory slasher film that apparently had theater audiences pissing and shitting themselves. I remember seeing these reports and thinking it can't possibly be that bad. So I watched both the first and second Terrifier, and long story short, not for me. Now, for what it's worth, I liked Terrifier 2 a lot more than the first one. The acting is better, the writing is better, pretty much everything is a step up actually, but it's a little too gratuitous for me. Now, if you know nothing about Terrifier, it's a new slasher franchise starring Art the Clown, and Art kills people in spectacularly brutal fashion. There's a splash of the supernatural in there too, and that pretty much summarizes both of the Terrifier films. I will say Art the Clown is possibly the scariest antagonist of any slasher I've seen. For all your Michael Myers and Ghostfaces out there, they're mostly silent and stoic killers, while Art has more of a Freddy Krueger mean streak to him. Except he doesn't talk, which means no cheesy one-liners and nothing to bring levity to the situation. One of the kills in this movie was so brutal and so over the top that I just started laughing. And if you've seen this movie, you probably know the one I'm talking about. It feels like it's never gonna end. And it goes on and on and on. Much like the movie overall, which is almost 2.5 hours. Once we got to the final scenes, I was so desensitized that I was kind of numb to what were supposed to be the most emotionally driven scenes in the movie. But yeah, Terrifier 2. Definitely not recommended viewing if you don't do well with shocking content, but if you do, Art the Clown is an oddly compelling, if disturbing, villain. Hats off to David Howard Thornton, by the way, for his portrayal. But honestly, not to sound like a prude, but I felt kind of gross after watching these movies.
Please stop, please.
So I think I'm probably gonna skip Terrifier 3. But I definitely appreciate the stylistic choices, and you know, like I said, Art, great character. So if you love the Terrifier movies, more power to you. It's just, it doesn't really appeal that much to me, I guess. Men is the latest film from director Alex Garland, the mind behind 28 Days Later and Ex Machina, both of which I liked. And I ended up liking this one too. Men is a story about a woman recovering from trauma who finds herself being followed and harassed by all the men of the rural town that she vacations to. And like I've said a couple times in this video when I'm trying to avoid spoilers, shenanigans ensue. However, with this one, calling them shenanigans may be a little too cavalier. It's a film that's grounded in some heavy, real-world issues, but it goes some interesting places with them. All the men in the town are played by actor Rory Kinnear, who does a standout job in a bunch of different roles, and seeing his face everywhere in the movie was a great idea for really immersing me as the viewer in the perspective of the main character and how she's viewing the world. This movie also takes, at one point, a hard left into a long and very interesting body horror sequence. And I really like body horror, so I found that whole sequence fascinating because I thought this was going to be more of a psychological thriller type of experience. And yeah, after watching it, I would definitely not categorize it as that. It's a horror film. And as for whether or not I liked it, I'm not sure I can answer. It really reminded me of the films that Ari Aster does, like Hereditary and Midsommar, where things go really off the rails at the end and you end up thinking about the movie afterwards, debating whether or not you actually understood what the movie was trying to say, or trying to convince yourself that what the movie had to say wasn't even that important. Huffing the copium, right? It wasn't that deep. But in all seriousness, Men, interesting movie. It's definitely a thought provoker, if nothing else. DeadStream is about a fictional internet content creator live streaming themselves exploring a haunted house. He's a 30-something white guy with a beard, so of course people have said we look alike. But in all seriousness, if you're a longtime fan of my channel, I don't think I could pick something more potentially up your alley than this movie.
Haunted houses are overdone. How can haunted houses be overdone? I've never done one before.
Whether or not you will like it will probably depend on how seriously you take it, so I'll just go ahead and say you should not take this movie seriously. It's comedy horror, my favorite subgenre. The main character, Sean, rhymes with John, interesting. The main character, Sean, is extremely unlikable, so they did a great job of portraying what the lowest common denominator internet star is like in that respect. Sean's just come back from getting canceled and wants to put on a really big stream exploring this haunted house. So he arms himself with a clown car of GoPros and streams the whole thing. Seriously, he has so many GoPro cameras. Just when you think he must be out of them, he pulls out another. So the reason I said this movie is probably up your alley is not just because it's all about internet content creation, but a lot of the first-person camera angles genuinely look like they're from an indie horror game. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but it made things even more relatable for me. All in all, had a great time with DeadStream, and if anything you're watching on screen right now piques your interest and you're in the mood for some funny found footage, you'll probably have a great time with it too. Well, I talked for a long time just now. Now, I know I didn't talk about every horror movie that came out in 2022, but I wanted to start dipping my toes into horror movie content on the channel, so I figured that doing a video like this covering the major releases of last year would be a good place to start. Out of all the 2022 horror movies I talked about just now, which means not counting Malignant, I'd say Pearl was probably my favorite, followed by Scream 5. And then after that, it's kind of a mishmash. For example, it's hard to say whether I liked Men more than DeadStream because one's extraordinarily serious, almost to a fault, and the other one is incredibly silly and has a completely different vibe. So I feel like I can't do a tier list or anything. It feels wrong to pit some of these against each other. But overall, I think 2022 was a really good year for horror movies, and I was happy with most of the ones that I saw. But how about you? Maybe your favorite film was The Menu, and you're seething at me right now. Or maybe you hated Orphan First Kill, and you can't believe I had the gall to like it.
We had skin in the game.
Feel free to let me know in the comments. And I'd also be very interested to know if you had a movie from last year that I didn't cover in this video that you really liked. I've seen some names floating around like Fresh, Piggy, Sissy, Bodies, 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 the new Hellraiser movie, The Invitation, Prey. You know, I know there's plenty more of movies that came out last year, so please give me your recommendations. And finally, let me know what you thought about this video. I might do another one like it sooner rather than later. So, thanks. See you in the next one. Think critically.